Good morning, my dear students. Today we will talk about Lesson 1, Friction in Unit 1. Now, let's know what is meant by friction force. Friction force, it is the force that exists between two surfaces when they touch each other and affects in the opposite direction of the movement and causes the object to slow down and stop. Now, let's talk about types of friction. There are different types of friction force such as friction between two solid objects, friction between a solid object and air, which is known as air resistance, friction between a solid object and water, which is known as water resistance. Now we will talk about the first type of friction, friction between two solid objects. It is a type of friction arises between two solid objects when they touch each other. Now we will have an activity to show the friction force between two solid objects. When you ride a bike and push the pedal, it moves forward. If you lift your feet from the pedal during the movement of the bike, will the bike keep moving in the same direction? The observation. The bike will move in the same direction, and when stop pedaling, the bike's speed decreases gradually until it stops. The conclusion from this activity that the friction force exists between the bicycle tires and the ground, where this force acts in the opposite direction of the movement, so the bicycle slows down until it stops. Now we will talk about friction and the type of the surface material. The friction force depends on the type of the material of the surfaces in contact. We have two types of surfaces, smooth surface and the rough surface. The friction force decreases between smooth surfaces and the object moves for a long distance. But on the rough surface, the friction force increases and the object moves for shorter distance. So the friction force increases between rough surfaces and decreases between smooth surfaces. Now let's talk about the second type of friction force, friction between solid object and air, which known as air resistance. Air resistance, it is the friction force resulting from the movement of solid object through air, and it acts in the opposite direction of the movement. Here are some examples of air resistance. Air resistance appears when you run in the open air, when the planes, rockets, and trains moving in the air, when you ride a bike in the air. Factors affecting the air resistance. Air resistance is affected by two factors, which are the speed of the moving object and the surface area of the moving object. Now we will talk about the first factor that affecting the air resistance, the speed of the moving object. The air resistance increases by increasing the speed of the object moves through the air. Here are some examples of this factor. The air resistance increases when a car moves at a high speed and also when you run fast in open air. Now we will talk about the second factor that affecting the air resistance, the surface area of moving object. The air resistance increases by increasing the surface area of the object moves through the air and vice versa. Here are some examples about this factor. The planes, rockets, and trains are designed in a streamlined shape. Give reason. To decrease air resistance by decreasing the surface area so they can move very fast. Here are another example. Birds have streamlined shapes, also to decrease the air resistance by decreasing the surface area. Here is another example about the second factor, that the parachutist opens the parachute to land safely. To increase the air resistance by increasing the surface area, so decreases his speed to land safely. Also, the birds or bats stretch their wings on landing. To increase the air resistance by increasing their surface area, so decrease their speed to land safely. Now we will talk about the third type of friction force, friction between a solid object and water, which known as water resistance. Water resistance, it is a friction force resulting from the movement of solid objects through water, and it acts in the opposite direction of the movement. Here are some examples of water resistance. Water resistance appears when you swim in a water, also swimming of fish in water, and the movement of boats in water. Factors affecting the water resistance. Water resistance is affected by two factors, which are the speed of the moving object and the surface area of the moving object. Let's talk about the first factor that affecting the water resistance, the speed of the moving object. The water resistance increases by increasing the speed of the object moves through the water and vice versa. The second factor that affecting the water resistance is the surface area of moving object. The water resistance increases by increasing the surface area of the object moves through water. Here are some examples about this factor. Ships are designed in streamlined shapes to decrease water resistance by decreasing the surface area so they can move fast. Here is another example. Fish have streamlined shapes. Also to decrease water resistance by decreasing the surface area. Hello my dear students. Now we will talk about Lesson 2 application of friction force in Unit 1. There are a lot of technological applications based on friction between two surfaces that are in contact. In this lesson, we are going to study the advantages of friction force and the disadvantages of friction force. Now we will talk about the first part of the lesson, the advantages or the benefits of friction force. Friction helps in moving and stopping cars or bicycles. Also, the friction helps us to control the car direction and speed. Here is another benefit of friction, that the car brakes that are used to slow down or stop the car depend on friction force. Also, from the advantages of friction, that friction is needed for lightning match, and also friction helps us to walk as the friction force between our shoes and the ground prevent us from slipping down. Now we will talk about the second part of the lesson, the disadvantages of friction force. Friction causes a rise in the temperature of the internal parts of machines, so it causes damage to the machines.